Jim and Terry show without Jim occupying the hot seat in the Hobbit Hole studio. But he will be back, he assures me. A few more podcasts and you'll hear his dulcet tones arguing from a conservative, religious point of view. And that point of view is sorely missing as we debate things. It is in the debate that we get closer and closer to what I would call the truth about things. It's not this, it may not be that, but in the dialogue between this and that, you may hear things that cause you to think, and that is always a good thing. I would like to start off this podcast with the late, great Frank Zappa. What? Yeah, well, let me set the stage for a bit. Wigmore Allen Gibbons, back in our early days, and that's nearly a dozen years ago, over a dozen years ago now, we were compared on a BBC Tease music introducing program by host Bob Fisher, compared by one of his guests who called in and said, "Was that an unreleased Frank Zappa track you just played?" In fact, it was a Wigmore Allen Gibbons track that Keith Allen had submitted to the local BBC for air, if possible, because they were doing a lot of unsigned, unknown musicians. And with Keith being, a resident of the area, it seemed like a natural fit. Let's plug ourselves over there. Keith is also the lead vocalist in many of our songs, so the contributions seem to be connecting with Middlesbrough in the UK. Anyway, all of that is background information. Sidebar to say that Frank Zappa had some really progressive ideas, and at the time, he was considered, maybe an anarchist. But he had some prescient things to say about the U.S., and I will cue the tape to something that's been going around Twitter lately. Frank Zappa reappearing, talking about the U.S. slide toward fascism. Not communism, fascism. Frank Zappa on an interview. Here we go.
Lesson here, but I'll tell you one thing: we must not see eye to eye on the idea of a government that must forbid things in order to protect
what is the government's role? You've told me several times what it shouldn't do.
How about national defense?
Yeah, I consider this national defense, pal. Our families are under attack from people like you with these lyrics.
John, you don't have to buy them.
Mr. Zappa, could I make a statement about national defense?
Yeah.
The biggest threat to America today is not communism. It's moving America toward a fascist theocracy. And everything that's happened during the Reagan administration is steering us right down that pipe.
Oh, Mr. Zappa, you're not really serious if you're saying we're going toward a fascist theocracy.
That's right, we are. When you have a government that prefers a certain moral code derived from a certain religion, and that moral code turns into legislation to suit one certain religious point of view, and if that code happens to be very, very right-wing, almost toward Attila the Hun...
Well, then you are an anarchist. Every form of civil government is based on some kind of morality, Frank.
Morality in terms of behavior, not in terms of theology.
There you go. You heard it from Frank Zappa. Now, I'm using that as a lead-in because the boogeyman for the United States ever since the McCarthy era of post-World War II was communism. The boogeyman were the communists. That's why they had the containment policy. That's why we had the all surround Russia and try to contain the spread of communism, try to contain the spread of communism in Asia. That's why we had the Vietnam War, ostensibly. And that was the boogeyman. Communism. You're going to see red dawn. You're going to need to get your NRA certificate and start stockpiling your weapons because the commies are coming. Well, as Frank Zappa pointed out, it may not be the commies that you really have to worry about. It may be the terror groups within America itself. And for that, I would like to link back to what we do know about the NRA and communist money. Communist Russia money going into the US NRA. Do you remember Maria Butina? She was convicted of laundering money through the NRA. The NRA leader had to step down. There was a businessman, U.S. businessman, also implicated in this plot, and it was all about Russia laundering money and influencing dark money. Can't trace the source, but we know how it was going on. She was convicted. Maria Butina. Don't forget these things because they're all on the pathway, as Frank Zappa might say, from Reagan, who I did not like myself, all the way to Donald Trump. Russia, Russia, Russia is the common theme. As my good friend Jim, who is absent, would have reminded me at this point, remember, it was Khrushchev who said, "We will bury the U.S. from within." Yes, no need to drop nukes or go direct in a hot war. Why don't you just mess with them? With social media, with buying influence, like the NRA, with, how about this, laundering money through Mar-a-Lago? Why not? Go direct to the top. Trump was on the news recently talking about being able to release a journalist, and I forget the news organization and the name of the journalist. Trump was on Truth Social saying he would have him released as soon as he won the election, even before he assumes office. And only he can do this. And I am reminded that anybody who says only I can do anything is a huge red commie flag. This stuff is in the theater of the absurd. Trump was also at a rally in the Bronx. And crowd size matters. Remember Sean Spicer in the Obama inauguration? Crowd size, the biggest crowd ever. Watch. No, they didn't. And we have aerial photography, as I mentioned in a previous podcast or two. We have the aerial photography of Trump's rally in New York. And the estimated sizes of tens of thousands, really, by the aerial photograph, if that was at the midpoint and maybe not at the beginning or at the end after people had drifted away after listening to Trump talk about putting on his pants, it was an embarrassment, a real disappointing crowd turnout, I would think, for the former guy. And estimated, looking at the photograph and having participated in a few demonstrations where crowds like that were gathered, it had to be less than 5, perhaps even around half of that. Anyway, crowd size matters. Doesn't matter to me particularly. It's just that truth matters. Eventually, the truth will set you free if you can bear the truth. And how do we know what the truth is? Well, we need evidence, and that goes from evidence of vaccine efficacy. Don't forget, in Ontario, we had our first fatality of a child through measles. Why? No vaccine. So the stuff that was going on during COVID, the anti-vax movement, which is still going on, and I'm signed up for now for my 6th dose. So, nothing happened to me, but I trust the science. Do you? And what science do you trust? We know that science was bought for the cancer-causing carcinogens in tobacco back in the day. Science can be bought. We also know that science from DuPont and other companies producing toxic chemicals, some of that stuff was bought. Research results fudged and changed. Yes, science can be bought, but not everybody can be bought. And that's where you have to go with what I would call the main bell curve of science. Where is everybody on this spectrum of belief? And for that, I'm going to switch over to the notion that COVID vaccine is being attacked once again still. And here's the latest that I found on that one.
Brett Weinstein refused to talk to me directly about what he got wrong about COVID vaccines, so I'm making this video. Previously on this channel, I made a video responding to Bret Weinstein saying this.
I have just staked my reputation on a claim about how the immune system works and how the vaccine, as described by those who designed it, should work. If I'm wrong, you, Michael Shermer, are sitting here, and there should be a flood of biologists ready to explain what I've got wrong.
So I did that. I got 3 people who are very knowledgeable in immunology to explain in detail what Bret got wrong. So did he admit he was wrong? No. Instead, he got 2 of his friends, neither of which are experts in immunology, and one of which is not even a scientist, to sit on his podcast with him and go through what they think we got wrong. And it was a mess of incorrect claims stated very boldly that lasted almost 3 hours. And I waited 6 months for that response, so that was pretty disappointing. So the same week Bret released that podcast episode, I made a short video saying that Bret and I could either hash this out live on camera together, or I can make another response video. I told him I'd give him 1 month to respond to me, and if I didn't hear from him, I'd assume that he didn't want to talk to me. And I didn't hear from him. So, he doesn't want to talk to me. So here we are making a response to that podcast episode. And I got 3 more experts to weigh in on whether or not Bret's claims are correct. And one of them happens to be a Nobel Prize winner. So stay to the end of the video if you want to see what those experts said, because they wrote in their responses to Bret. But for the bulk...
All right, that is from Dr. Wilson Debunked the Funk, talking about Bret Weinstein and his claims about the vaccine, about mRNA, about parts of the mRNA vaccine winding up in tissue that it wasn't supposed to wind up in, causing all sorts of problems to all sorts of body systems that it wasn't supposed to, especially, dun dun dun, the heart. Well, of course, all of this has been debunked thoroughly over the past 3 years. As research goes on, there's more and more information to debunk it all. And again, do you appeal to the experts or do you appeal to the fringe? And Bret Weinstein is the fringe. So again, it hasn't gone away. It's still there. People will still argue what they want. Put the evidence up. If you post it, we can debate it. We can look at the examination of the data. If you don't post the information, we can't get at the truth. We'll never have an understanding. People believe what they need to be true. If you're an anti-vaxxer, you need to believe that taking a vaccine into your body was the biggest thing that you could do to preserve your blue blood, your pure blood. For those of us who follow the science, we were participating in trying to stem the tide and ravages that would threaten to overwhelm the medical system around the world. What do you believe? Are the commies the real problem? Or is lack of information, lack of understanding the problem? And if so, how do we fix it? Jim and Terry Show signing off. Bye-bye.